hopefully we don't have any more issues. Maybe I should... I'll just leave it at 2. Okay. Impressed murmurs and a nod from his father to Roland made Dorian's jaw clench. 3 matching rings, 3 black rings to signify... what? That they were bound in some way to each other? How had Roland gotten past his father's and Parrington's defenses so quickly? Because of his support of a place like Calicula? Nehemiah's words from the night before kept ringing in his head. He'd seen the scars on Selena's back up close, a brutal mess of flesh that made him sick with rage to look at. How many like her were rotting away in these labor camps? And where will the slaves sleep? Dorian suddenly asked. Will you build shelter for them too? Everyone, including his father, turned to look at him, but Roland just shrugged. They're slaves. Why shelter them when they can sleep in the mines? Then we wouldn't waste time bringing them in and out every day. Oh my god! More murmurs and nods. Dorian stared at Roland. If we have a surplus of slaves, then why not let some of them go? Surely they're not all rebels and criminals. A growl from down the table. His father. Watch your tongue, Prince. Not a father to his son, but a king to his heir. Still, that icy rage was growing, and he kept seeing Selena's scars, her too thin body the day they'd pulled her out of Endivere, her gaunt face and the hope and desperation mingling in her eyes. He heard Nehemiah's words. What she went through is a blessing compared to what most endure. Dorian peered down the table at his father, whose face was dark with irritation. Is this the plan? Now that we've conquered the continent, you'll throw everyone into Calicula or Endivere until there's no one left in the kingdoms but people from Ardalan? Silence. Oh, I'm scared. The rage dragged him down to the place where he'd felt like that flicker of ancient power when Nehemiah had touched his heart. Keep tightening the leash, and it's going to snap, Dorian said to his father, then looked across the table to Roland and Mullison. How about you spend a year in Calicula, and when you're done, you two can sit here and tell me about your plans for expansion. Oh my god! His father slammed his hands on the table, rattling the glasses and pitchers. You will mind your mouth, Prince, or you will be thrown out of this room before the vote. Dorian shot out of his seat. Nehemiah had been right. He hadn't looked at the others in Endivere. He hadn't let himself. I've heard enough, he snarled to his father, at Roland and Mullison, at Parrington, and at all the lords and men in the room. You want my vote? Then here it is. No, not in 1,000 years. Who is this? Who is this? His father growled, but Dorian was already walking across the red marble floor, past the horrible fireplace, out the doors and into the bright halls of the glass castle. He didn't know where he was going, only that he felt freezing cold, a cold that fueled the calm, glittering rage. He took flight after flight of stairs down into the stone castle, then long hallways and narrow staircases until he found a forgotten hall, where there were no eyes to see him as he drew back his fist and punched the wall. The stone cracked under his hand. Not a small crack, but a spiderweb that kept growing and growing toward the window on the right until the window exploded. What? Glass showering everywhere as Dorian dropped into a crouch and covered his head. Air rushed in, so cold his eyes blurred, but he just knelt there, fingers in his hair, breathing as the anger ebbed out of him. It was impossible. Maybe he just hit the wall in the wrong spot, and the damn thing was so ancient that it had only been waiting for something like this to happen. He'd never heard of stone cracking that way, spreading out like a living thing. And then the window. Heart racing, Dorian lowered his hands from his head and looked at them. There wasn't a bruise, or a cut, or even a trace of pain, but he'd hit that wall so hard as hard as he could. He should have broken his hand, yet his knuckles were unharmed, only white from gripping his fingers in a tight fist. On trembling legs, Dorian rose and surveyed the damage. The wall had splintered, but remained intact. The ancient window, however, had shattered completely, and around where he had crouched, a perfect circle, clean of debris, as if the glass and wood had had showered everything but him. It wasn't possible, because magic. Dorian dropped to his knees and was violently sick. Damn! Curled on the couch beside Kale, Selena took a sip of her tea and frowned. Can't you hire a servant like Philippa so we can have someone bring us treats? Kale raised an eyebrow. Don't you ever stay in your own rooms anymore? No, not if she could help it. Not with Elena and Mort and all that nonsense, just a secret door away. Ordinarily, she might have sought sanctuary in the library, but not now. Not when the library held so many secrets it made her head spin to think about them. For a moment, she wondered if Nehemiah had discovered anything about the riddle in Davis's office. She'd have to ask her tomorrow. She kicked Cale in the ribs with a sock-covered foot. All I'm saying is that I'd like some chocolate cake every now and then. He closed his eyes. And an apple tart. And a loaf of bread. And a pot of stew. And a mountain of cookies. He chuckled as she put her foot against his face and pushed. He grabbed her foot and wouldn't let go when she tried yanking her leg back. It's true, and you know it, Lena. So what if it is? Haven't I earned the right to eat as much as I want, whenever I want? She wrenched her foot out of his grasp as the smile faded from his face. Yes, he said quietly, his voice barely audible over the crackling fire. You have. After a few moments of silence, he stood up and walked to the door. She sat up on her elbows. Where are you going? He opened the door. To get you chocolate cake. Anyway, when he returned, and after they'd both eaten half of the cake he'd swiped from the kitchens, Selena lay back on the couch, a hand on her full belly. Cale was already sprawled across the cushions, sleeping soundly, staying up until the middle of the night at the ball with an awakening for their sunrise run this morning had been exhausting. Why hadn't he just canceled the run? You know, the courts weren't always like this, Nehemiah had said. There was a time when people valued honor and loyalty, when serving a ruler wasn't about obedience and fear. Do you think another court like that could ever rise again? Selena hadn't given Nehemiah an answer. She hadn't wanted to talk about it. But looking at Cale now, at the man he was, and the man he was still becoming, yes, she thought. Yes, Nehemiah, it could rise again, if we could find more men like him. But not in a world with this king, she realized. He'd crush a court like that before Nehemiah could muster one. If the king were gone, then the court that Nehemiah dreamed of could change the world. That court could undo the damage of a decade of brutality and terror. It could restore the lands ravaged by conquest and renew the hearts of the kingdoms that shattered when Ardalan marched in. And in that world, Selena swallowed hard. She and Cale would never be a normal boy and girl, but perhaps in that world they could make a life of their own. She wanted that life, because even though he'd pretended nothing had happened after the dance they'd shared last night, something had. And maybe it had taken her this long to realize it, but this man, she wanted life. She wanted that life with him. The last time she wanted a life with a man, he ended up... So, I'm a little scared. I'm a little scared. The world Nehemiah dreamed about. I'm a little scared. The world was nothing more than a shred of hope and a memory of what the kingdoms had once been. But perhaps the rebel movement truly knew about the king's plans and how to ruin them, how to destroy them, with or without Aelin. There's that fucking last name again. I will get this. Galathanus. No. Whatever. And whatever army they claimed she was raising. Selena sighed and eased off the couch, gently shifting Cale's legs so she didn't disturb him. She turned back, though, just once, leaning down to brush her fingers through his short hair, then grazed them along his cheek. Then she quietly slipped from his room, taking the remnants of the chocolate cake with her. She was wondering whether eating the rest of the chocolate cake would make her severely sick when she turned down her hallway and spotted Dorian sitting on the floor outside her rooms. He looked over when he saw her, his eyes going to the cake in her hands. Selena blushed and lifted her chin. They hadn't spoken since their argument over Roland. Perhaps he'd come to apologize. Served him right. But as she neared and Dorian got to his feet, she took one look at the expression in his sapphire eyes and knew he wasn't here for an apology. It's a bit late for a visit, she said by way of greeting. Dorian put his hands in his pockets and leaned against the wall. His face was pale, his eyes haunted, but he gave her a half smile. It's a bit late for chocolate cake, too. Been raiding the kitchens? Sorry, I lost my spot. She remained outside her rooms, running an eye over him. He looked fine. No bruises, no sign of injury, yet something was off. What are you doing here? He avoided her gaze. I was looking for Nehemiah, but her servant said she was out. I thought they meant here. Then I thought you two might be out for a stroll. I haven't seen her since this morning. Is there something you want from her? Dorian took a ragged breath, and Selena suddenly realized just how cold it was in the hallway. How long had he been sitting here on the freezing floor? No, he said, shaking his head as if convincing himself of something. No, there isn't. He began walking away. She started speaking before she knew she'd opened her mouth. Dorian, what's wrong? He turned. For a heartbeat, there was something in his eyes that reminded her of a world long since burned, a glimmer of color and power that still stalked the edges of her nightmares. But he blinked, and it was gone. Nothing. There's nothing wrong at all. He strode away, hands still in his pockets. Enjoy your cake, he said over his shoulder, and then he was gone. Galathinius. Okay, Galathinius. Okay, Galathinius. I just have to remember. Every time it comes back up, I forget how to pronounce it. Galathinius. Chapter 19. Cale stood before the king's throne, almost boring himself to tears as he gave yesterday's report. He tried not to think about last night, how the brief touch of Selena's fingers through his hair and on his face had sent a pang of desire through him, so strong he'd wanted to grab her and pin her to the couch. It had taken all his self-control to keep his breathing steady, to keep pretending that he was asleep. After she'd left, his heart had been pounding so hard it took him an hour to calm enough to actually sleep. Looking at the king now, Cale was glad he'd controlled himself. The line between him and Selena was there for a reason. Crossing it could call into question his loyalty to the king before him, not to mention the way it would impact his friendship with Dorian. The prince had made himself scarce this past week. Cale would have to make a point today to go see him. Dorian and the king were where his loyalty lay. Without his loyalty, he was no one. Without it, he'd given up his family, his title, for nothing. Cale finished explaining his security plans for the carnival that would arrive today, and the king nodded. Very well, Captain. Make sure your men watch the castle grounds, too. I know what sort of filth likes to travel with these carnivals, and I don't want them wandering around. Cale bowed his head. Consider it done. Normally, the king would dismiss him with a grunt and a wave, but today the man merely studied him, an elbow propped on the arm of the glass throne. After a moment of silence, during which Cale wondered if a castle spy had somehow been looking through the keyhole while Selena touched him, the king spoke. Princess Nehemiah needs to be watched. Of all the things the king could have said, this was not what Cale had expected, but he kept his face blank and did not question the words that implied so much. Her influence is starting to be felt in these halls, and I'm beginning to wonder if perhaps the time has come to remove her back to Ilwi. I know that we already have some men watching her, but I also received word that there was an anonymous threat on her life. Questions roared through him, along with a rising sense of dread. Who had threatened her? What had Nehemiah said or done to warrant the threat? There he goes again. Trying to put the blame on her when it does not need to be placed there. It doesn't. Cale stiffened. I haven't heard anything about that. The king smiled. No one has. Not even the princess herself. It seems she's made some enemies outside the palace as well. I'll have extra guards watch her room and patrol her wing of the castle. I'll alert her immediately of... There's no need to alert her, or anyone. The king gave him a pointed look. She might try to use the fact that someone wants her dead as a bargaining chip. Might try to make herself into a martyr of sorts. So tell your men to stay quiet. He didn't think Nehemiah would do that, but Cale kept his mouth shut. He'd tell his men to be discreet. And he wouldn't tell the princess. Or Selena. Just because he was friendly with Nehemiah, just because he was Selena's friend, it didn't change anything. While he knew that Selena would be furious that he didn't tell her, he was the captain of the guard. Oh, this is it. This is the decision that changes all other decisions, isn't it? This is it. In not telling them Nehemiah is gonna die, Selena's somehow gonna figure out that Cale knew, although he'll probably just tell her. And then Selena will literally be like, fuck you, I'm leaving, and leave him. Yeah, I saw it all so clearly. I saw it all so clearly right now. Oh, this is the decision that is just going to ruin everything. Oh, that sucks. While he knew that Selena would be furious that he didn't tell her, he was the captain of the guard. He had fought and sacrificed nearly as much as Selena had to get to this position. He'd let her get too close by asking her to dance. He'd let himself get too close. Captain? Cale blinked, then bowed low. You have my word, Your Majesty. Ugh. He's gonna regret it. Oh, that's so sad. Dorian panted, swinging the sword through the air in a precise parry that sent the guard scrambling. His third match and his third opponent about to go down. He hadn't slept last night, nor had he been able to sit still this morning, so he'd come to the barracks, hoping to have someone wear him down enough for exhaustion to take over. He'd parried and deflected the guard's assault. It had to be a mistake. Maybe he dreamed it all up. Maybe it had just been a combination of the right elements at the wrong time. Magic was gone, and there was no reason that he should have that power, when not even his father had been gifted with magic. Magic had been dormant in the Havillard bloodline for generations. Dorian got past the guard's defense in an easy maneuver, though when the young man raised his hands in defeat, the prince had to wonder if he'd let him win. The thought sent a growl rippling through him. He was about to demand another match when someone sauntered over to them. Mind if I join? Dorian stared at Roland, whose rapier looked like it had hardly ever been used. The guard took one look at Dorian's face, bowed, and found someplace else to be. Dorian watched his cousin, the black ring on Roland's finger. I don't think you want to dance with me today, cousin. Ah, Roland said, frowning. About yesterday. I'm sorry for that. Had I known the labor camps were such a sensitive matter for you, I never would have broached the subject or worked with Counselor Mollison. I called off the vote after you left. Mollison was furious. Dorian raised his brows. Oh? Roland shrugged. You were right. I don't know anything about what it's like in those camps. I only took up the cause because Parrington suggested that I work with Mollison, who stood to gain a lot from the expansion because of his ties to the iron industry. And I'm supposed to believe you? Roland gave him a winning smile. We are family, after all. Family. Dorian had never really considered himself to be in an actual family, and certainly not now. If anyone found out about what had happened in the hallway yesterday, about the magic he might have, his father would kill him. He had a second son, after all. Families weren't exactly supposed to think like that, were they? Dorian had gone looking for Nehemiah last night out of desperation, but in the light of morning he was grateful he hadn't seen her. If the princess had that sort of information about him, she could use it to her advantage, blackmail him all she wanted. And Roland, Dorian began walking away. Why don't you save your maneuvering for someone who cares? Roland kept pace beside him. But who else is more worthy than my own cousin? What greater challenge than winning you over to my schemes? Dorian shot him a warning glare and found the young man grinning. If only you'd seen the chaos that erupted after you left, Roland went on. As long as I live, I'll never forget the look on your father's face when you growled at them all. Roland laughed, and despite himself, Dorian found a smile tugging on his lips. I thought the old bastard would combust right there. Dorian shook his head. He'd hanged men for calling him such names, you know. Yes, but when you're as handsome as I am, dear cousin, you'd be surprised how much more you can get away with. Dorian rolled his eyes, but considered his cousin for a few moments. Roland might be close with Parrington and his father, but perhaps he'd just been pulled into Parrington's schemes and needed someone to steer him right. And if his father and the other councilmen thought that they could use Roland to win support for their dark dealings, well, then it was time for Dorian to play the game too. He could turn his father's pawn against him. Between the two of them, surely they could sway enough of the council to oppose more unsavory proposals. You really called off the vote? Roland waved a hand. I think you're right that we're pushing our luck with the other kingdoms. If we want to keep control, we need to find a balance. Shoving them into slavery won't help. It might turn more people toward rebellion. Dorian nodded slowly and paused. I have somewhere to be, he lied, sheathing his sword. But perhaps I'll see you in the hall for dinner. Roland gave him an easy smile. I'll try to muster up a few lonely ladies to keep us company. Dorian waited until Roland was around the corner before heading outside, where the chaos of the courtyard sucked him up. The carnival his mother had commissioned for Holland, her belated Yulemas present to him, had finally arrived. It was Not a massive carnival. Only a few black tents, a dozen cage wagons, and 5 covered wagons had been set up in the open courtyard. The whole thing felt rather somber, despite the fiddlers sawing away at the merry shouts of the workers scrambling to finish setting up the tents in time to surprise Holland that evening. People hardly looked Dorian's way as he meandered through the throng. Then again, he was dressed in sweaty old clothes and had his cloak wrapped tightly around him. Only the guards, highly trained and aware of everything, noticed him, but they understood his need for anonymity without being told. A stunning, beautiful woman walked out of one of the tents, blonde, slender, tall, and dressed in fine riding clothes. A mountain-sized man also emerged, carrying long poles of iron that Dorian doubted most men could even lift. Dorian passed by one of the large covered wagons, pausing at the words written in white paint on the side. The Carnival of Mirrors. See illusions and reality collide. He frowned. Had his mother even put a moment's consideration into the gift, into how it might appear, the message it would send? Carnivals, with their illusions and tricks, always push the limit of outright treason. Dorian snorted. Perhaps he belonged in one of these cages. A hand landed on his shoulder, and Dorian whirled to find Cale smiling at him. I thought I'd find you here. He wasn't surprised in the least that Cale had recognized him. Dorian was about to smile back when he noticed who was with the captain. Selena was standing at one of the covered cages, listening through the black velvet curtains to whatever was inside. What are you two doing here so early? The unveiling's not until nightfall. Nearby, the gargantuan man began hammering foot-long spikes into the frozen earth. She wanted to walk, and Cale suddenly gave a violent curse. Dorian didn't particularly want to, but he followed after Cale as he stalked to Selena and yanked her arm away from the black curtain. You'll lose your hand like that, the captain warned, and she glared at him. Then she gave Dorian a closed-lipped smile that felt more like a wince. He hadn't lied to her last night about wanting to see Nehemiah, but he'd also found himself wanting to see her, until she appeared with that ridiculous half-eaten cake, which she clearly had plans to devour in private. He couldn't begin to imagine how she'd looked at him if she found out he might, he kept telling himself, have some trace of magic within him. Nearby, the beautiful blonde woman perched on a stool and began playing the lute. He knew that the men and guards started to flock to her weren't just there for the lovely music. Cale shifted on his feet, and Dorian realized that they'd been standing there silently, not saying anything. Selena crossed her arms. Did you find Nehemiah last night? He had a feeling she already knew the answer, but he said, No, I went back to my room after I saw you. Cale looked at Selena, who merely shrugged. What did that mean? So, Selena said, surveying the carnival. Do we really have to wait for your brother before we can see what's inside all these cages? Looks like the performers are already starting. And they were. All sorts of jugglers and sword swallowers and fire breathers milled about, while tumblers balanced on impossible things. Chair backs, poles, and beds of nails. I think this is just practice, Dorian said, and he hoped he was right, because if Holland learned that anyone had started without his approval, Dorian would make sure he was far away from the castle when the tantrum occurred. Selena said, and walked deeper into the teeming carnival. Cale was watching the prince warily. There were questions in Cale's eyes, questions that Dorian had no intention of answering, so he strode after Selena, because leaving the carnival would feel too much like drawing a line. They made their way to the last and largest wagon in the rough semicircle of tents and cages. Welcome, welcome, shouted an old woman, bent and gnarled with age, from a podium at the foot of the stairs. A crown of stars adorned her silver hair, and though her tanned face was saggy and speckled, there was a spark in her brown eyes. Look into my mirrors and see the future. Let me examine your palm so I might tell you myself. The old woman pointed with a knotted cane at Selena. Care to have your fortune told, girl? Dorian blinked, then blinked again at the sight of the woman's teeth. They were razor-sharp, like a fish's, and made of metal, of iron. Selena pulled her green cloak tightly around her, but remained staring at the crone. Dorian had heard the legend of the fallen witch kingdom, where bloodthirsty witches had overthrown the peaceful Crochan dynasty, and then ripped apart the kingdom stone by stone. 500 years later, songs were still sung of the deadly wars that had left the Iron-Teeth clans the only ones standing on a killing field. Dead Crochan queens all around them. But the last Crochan queen had cast a spell to ensure that as long as Iron-Teeth banners flew, no bit of soil would yield life to them. Come into my wagon, dear heart, the old woman crooned at Selena. and let old Baba Yellowlegs take a look into your future. Sure enough, peeking out from beneath her brown robe were saffron-colored ankles. Selena's face was drained of color, and Cale went to her side and took her elbow. Despite the way the protective gesture made Dorian's gut twist, he was glad Cale had done it. But this was all just a sham. That woman had probably put a fake set of iron teeth and sheer yellow stockings and called herself Baba Yellowlegs to make carnival patrons hand over good coin. "You're a witch," Selena said, her voice strangled. She didn't think it was a sham, apparently. No, her face was still white as death. God, was she actually scared? Baba Yellowlegs laughed a crow's cackle and bowed. The last-born witch in the Witch Kingdom. To Dorian's shock, Selena took a step back, closer to Cale, a hand going to the necklace she always wore. "Care to have your fortune read now?" "No," Selena said, almost leaning into Cale. "Then get out of my way and let me go about my business. I've never seen such a cheap crowd," Baba Yellowlegs snarled and lifted her head to look over them. "Fortunes! Fortunes!" Cale took a step toward her, a hand on his sword. "Don't be so rude to your customers." The crone smiled, her teeth glinting in the afternoon light as she sniffed at him. "And what would a man who smells of the Silver Lake do to an innocent old witch like me?" A chill went down Dorian's spine, and it was Selena's turn to grab onto Cale's arm as she tried to pull him away, but Cale refused to move. "I don't know what sort of sham you're running, old woman, but you'd best mind your tongue before you lose it." Baba Yellowlegs licked her razor-sharp teeth. "Come and get it," she purred. Challenge flashed in Cale's eyes, but Selena was still so pale that Dorian took her by the arm, leading her away. "Let's go," he said, and the old woman shifted her eyes to him. If she could indeed tell things about them, then the last place he wanted to be was here. "Cale, let's go." The witch was grinning at him as she used a long metallic nail to pick out something from her teeth. "Hide from fate all you like," Baba Yellowlegs said as they turned away, "but it shall soon find you." "You're shaking." "No, I'm not," Selena hissed, batting Cale's hand from her arm. It was bad enough that Dorian was there, but for Cale to witness her coming face to face with Baba Yellowlegs. She knew the stories, legends that had given her brutal nightmares as a child. A first-hand account that a former friend had once told her, given how that friend had foully betrayed and nearly killed her. Selena had hoped that the horrific stories about the Iron-Teeth witches were just more lies. But seeing that woman, Selena swallowed hard. Seeing that woman, feeling the sense of otherness that radiated from her, Selena had no trouble believing that these witches were capable of consuming a human child until nothing but clean-picked bones remained. Frozen down to her core now, she followed Dorian as he strode away from the carnival. While she'd been standing in front of that wagon, all she'd wanted, for some reason, was to get inside it, like there was something waiting for her within. And that crown of stars the witch had been wearing, and then her amulet had started feeling heavy and warm, the way it had the night she'd seen that person in the hall. If she ever came back to the carnival, she would bring Nehemiah with her, just to see if Yellowlegs was indeed what she claimed to be. She didn't give a damn about what was in the cages. Not anymore. Not with Yellowlegs to hold her interest. She followed Dorian and Cale without hearing a single word they said until they had somehow arrived at the royal stables, and Dorian was leading them inside. "I was going to give it to you on your birthday," he said to Cale. But why wait another 2 days? Dorian stopped before a stall. Cale exclaimed, "Are you out of your mind?" Dorian grinned, an expression she hadn't seen in so long that it made her remember late nights spent tangled up with him, the warmth of his breath on her skin. "What? You deserve it." A night-black Asterian stallion stood within the pen, staring at them with ancient dark eyes. Cale was backing away, hands raised. "This is a gift for a prince, not—" Dorian clicked his tongue. "Nonsense. I'll be offended if you don't accept." "I can't." Cale shifted, pleading eyes to Selena, but she shrugged. "I had an Asterian mare once," she admitted, and both of them blinked. Selena went up to the stall and held out her fingers, letting the stallion sniff her. Her name was Cassida. She smiled at the memory, stroking the stallion's velvet soft nose. It meant drinker of the wind, and the dialect of the Red Desert. She looked like a storm-tossed sea. "How did you get an Asterian mare? They're worth even more than the stallions," Dorian said. It was the first normal-sounding question he'd asked her in weeks. She looked over her shoulder at them and flashed a fiendish grin. I stole her from the Lord of Exandria. Cale's eyes grew wide, and Dorian cocked his head. It was so comical that she started laughing. I swear on the word it's the truth. I'll tell you the story some other time. She backed away, nudging Cale toward the pen. The horse huffed at his fingers, and beast and man looked at each other. Dorian was still watching her with narrowed eyes, but when she caught him staring, he turned to Cale. Is it too early to ask what you'll be doing for your birthday? Selena crossed her arms. We have plans, she said before Cale could reply. She didn't mean to sound so sharp, but, well, she'd been planning the night for a few weeks now. Cale looked at her over her shoulder. We do? Selena gave him a venomously sweet smile. Oh, yes. It might not be an Asterian stallion, but Dorian's eyes flashed. Well, I hope you have fun, he interrupted. Cale quickly looked back at the horse as Selena and Dorian faced each other. Whatever familiar expressions he'd once worn were now gone, and part of her, the part that had spent so many nights looking forward to seeing that handsome face, truly mourned it. Looking at him became difficult. She left them in the stables with a brief good night, congratulating Cale on his new gift. She didn't dare turn in the direction of the carnival, where the sound of the crowd suggested that Holland had made his appearance and unveiled the cages. Instead, she sprinted up the stairs to the warmth of her rooms, trying to shut out the image of the witch's iron teeth and the way she'd called after them with those words about fate, so similar to what Mort had said on the night of the eclipse. Perhaps it was intuition, or perhaps it was because she was a miserable person who couldn't even trust the advice of a friend, but she wanted to go back to the tomb, alone. Maybe Nehemiah was wrong about the amulet being irrelevant, and she was tired of waiting for her friend to find the time to research the eye riddle. She'd go back just once and never tell Nehemiah, because the hole in the wall was shaped like an eye, its iris removed to form a space that would perfectly fit the amulet she wore around her neck. What are we reading to? 20? Through 20? We started on 17. It's about 3 chapters. Chapter 20. Mort, Selena said, and the skull knocker opened an eye. It's terribly rude to wake someone when they're sleeping, he said drowsily. Would you have preferred it if I knocked on your face? He glared at her. I need to know something. She held out the amulet. This necklace. Does it truly have power? Of course it does. But it's thousands of years old. So? Mort yawned. It's magic. Magical things rarely age as normal objects do. But what does it do? It protects you, as Elena said. It guards you from harm, though you certainly seem to do your best to get into trouble. Selena opened the door. I think I know what it does. Perhaps it was mere coincidence, but the riddle had been worded so specifically. Perhaps Davis had been looking for the same thing Elena wanted her to find, the source of the king's power. This could be the first step toward uncovering that. You're probably wrong, Mort said as she walked by. I'm just warning you. She didn't listen. She went right up to the hollow eye in the wall and stood on tiptoe to look through. The wall on the other side was still blank. Unfastening her necklace, Selena carefully lifted the amulet to the eye, and it fit. Sort of. Her breath caught in her throat, and Selena leaned up against the hole, peering through the delicate gold bands. Nothing. No change on the wall or on the giant word mark. She turned the necklace upside down, and it was the same. She tried it on either side, backward, angled, but nothing. Just the same blank stone wall, illuminated by a shaft of moonlight from some vent above. She pushed against the stone, feeling for any door, any movable panel. But it's the eye of Elena. It is only with the eye that one can see rightly. What other eye is there? You could rip out your own and see if it fits, Mort sang from the doorway. Why won't it work? Do I need to say a spell? She glanced at the sarcophagus of the queen. Perhaps the spell would be triggered by ancient words hiding right under her nose. Wasn't that always how these things happened? She refitted the amulet into the stone. Ah, she called into the night air, reciting the words engraved at Elena's feet. Time's rift. Nothing happened. Mort cackled. She snatched the amulet out of the wall. Oh, I hate this. I hate this stupid tomb, and I hate these stupid riddles and mysteries. Fine. Nehemiah was right, that the amulet was a dead end, and she was a wretched, horrible friend for being so distrustful and impatient. I told you it wouldn't work. Then what will work? That riddle does reference something in this tomb, behind that wall, doesn't it? Yes, it does, but you still haven't asked the proper question. I've asked you dozens of questions, and you won't give me any answers. Come back another, he started, but Selena had already stalked up the stairs. Selena stood on the barren edge of a ravine, a chill northern wind ruffling her hair. She'd had this dream before, always this setting, always this night of the year. Behind her sloped a rocky, wasted plain, and before her stretched a chasm of so long it disappeared into the starlit horizon. Across the ravine was a lush, dark wood, rustling with life, and on the grassy lip of the other side stood the white stag, watching her with ancient eyes. His massive antlers glowed in the moonlight, wreathing him in ivory glory, just as she remembered. It had been on a chill night like this that she'd spotted him through the bars of her prison wagon on the way to Endovir, a glimmer of a world before it was burned to ash. They watched each other in silence. She took a half step closer to the edge, but paused as loose pebbles trickled her feet, tumbling into the ravine. There was no end to the darkness in that ravine, no end and no beginning either. It seemed to breathe, pulsing with whispers of faded memories, forgotten faces. Sometimes it felt as though the darkness stared back at her, and the face it wore was her own. Beneath the dark, she could have sworn she heard the rushing of a half-frozen river, swollen with melting snow off the staghorns, a flash of white, the thud of hooves on soft earth, and Selena looked up from the ravine. The stag had come closer, his head now angled as if inviting her to join him. But the ravine only seemed to grow wider, like the maw of a giant beast opening to devour the world. So Selena did not cross, and the stag turned away, his steps near silent as he disappeared between the tangled trees of the ageless wood. Selena awoke to darkness. The fire was nothing but cinders, and the moon had set. She studied the ceiling, the faint shadows cast by the city lights in the distance. It was always the same dream, always this one night, as if she could ever forget the day when everything she had loved had been wrenched from her, and she'd awoken covered in blood that was not her own. She got out of bed, Fleetwood leaping down beside her. She walked a few steps, then paused in the center of the room, staring into the dark, into the endless ravine, still beckoning to her. Fleetfoot nuzzled her bare legs, and Selena reached down to stroke the hound's head. They remained there for a moment, gazing into the blackness without end. Selena left the castle long before dawn broke. When Selena didn't meet Cale at the barracks before that dawn, he gave her 10 minutes before stalking up to her rooms. Just because she didn't feel like going out in the cold wasn't an excuse to be lax with her training. Not to mention, he was particularly interested in hearing the story about how she'd stolen an Asterian mare from the Lord of Exandria. He smiled at the thought, shaking his head. Only Selena would have the nerve to do something like that. His smile faded when he reached her chambers and found Nehemiah sitting at the small table in the foyer, a cup of steaming tea before her. There were some books piled in front of the princess, and she looked up from one of them as he entered. Cale bowed. The princess just said, "She's not here." Selena's bedroom door was wide enough to reveal that the bed was empty. Bedroom door? Did I say that? That the bed was empty and already made. Where is she? Nehemiah's eyes softened as she picked up a note that was lying among the books. "She's taken today off," she said, reading from the note before setting it down. "If I were to guess, I'd say that she's as far away from the city as she can get in half a day's ride." "Why?" Nehemiah smiled sadly. "Because today is the 10th anniversary of her parents' death." Sadness. Chapter 21. Cale's breath caught. He remembered her screaming at the duel with Cain, when Cain had taunted her about the brutal murder of her parents, when she'd awoken covered in their blood. She'd never told him anything else, and he hadn't dared ask. He knew she'd been young, but he hadn't realized she'd only been 8. 8. 10 years ago, Terrasen had been an upheaval, and anyone who had defied Ardalan's invading forces had been slaughtered. Entire families had been dragged out of their homes and murdered. His stomach clenched. What horrors had she witnessed that day? Cale ran a hand over his face. "She told you about her parents in her note?" Maybe it held a shred more information. Anything for him to better understand what sort of woman he'd be facing when she returned, what sort of memories he'd have to contend with. No, Nehemiah said. She didn't tell me, but I know. She watched him with a calculated stillness, a switch to the defensive that he recognized. What sort of secrets was she protecting for her friend? And what sort of secrets did Nehemiah herself keep that had caused the king to have her watched? The fact that he didn't know anything about it and about how much the king... Sorry. It's hot in here, y'all. It's only 94 outside. Woo! The fact that he didn't know anything about it, about how much the king knew, enraged him to no end. And then there was the other question. Who had threatened the princess's life? He had ordered more guards to look after her, but so far there had been no sign of anyone wanting to harm her. How do you know about her parents? He asked. Some things you hear with your ears, others you hear with your heart. She looked away from the intensity. He looked away from the intensity in her eyes. When is she coming back? Nehemiah returned to the book in front of her. It looked like it was filled with strange symbols, vaguely familiar markings that tickled at his memory. She said she won't be back until after nightfall. If I were to guess, I'd say she didn't want to spend one moment of daylight in this city, especially in this castle. And the home of the man whose soldiers had probably butchered her family. Cale took the morning training run alone. He ran through the mist-shrouded game park until his very bones were exhausted. In the misty foothills above Rifthold, Selena strode between the trees of the small forest, barely more than a sliver of darkness winding through the woods. She had been walking since before dawn, letting Fleetfoot follow as she would. Today, even the forest seemed silent. Good. Today was not a day for the sounds of life. Today was for the hollow wind rustling branches, for the rushing of a half-frozen river, for the crunch of snow under her boots. On this day, last year, she'd known what she had to do, had seen every step with such brutal clarity that it had been easy when the time came. She'd once told Dorian and Cale that she'd snapped that day in the salt mines of Endivere, but it was a lie. Snapped implied too human of a feeling. Nothing like the cold, hopeless rage that had taken hold and shut everything down when she'd awoken from the dream of the stag and the ravine. She found a large boulder nestled between the bumps and hollows and sank down on its smooth, ice-cold top. Fleetwood soon sitting beside her, wrapping her arms around the dog, Selena looked out into the still forest, and remembered the day she'd unleashed herself upon Endivere. Oh shit, we're gonna get to hear it. Selena panted through her bared teeth as she yanked the pickaxe out of the overseer's stomach. The man gurgled blood, clutching at his gut as he looked at the slaves in supplication. But one glance from Selena, one flash of eyes that showed she had gone beyond the edge, kept the slaves at bay. She merely smiled down at the overseer as she swung the axe into his face. His blood sprayed her legs. The slaves still stayed far away when she brought down the axe upon the shackles that bound her ankles to the rest of them. She didn't offer to free them, and they didn't ask. They knew how useless it would be. The woman at the end of the chain gang was unconscious. Her back poured blood, split open by the iron-tipped whip of the dead overseer. She would die by tomorrow if her wounds were not treated. Even if they were, she'd probably die from infection. Endivere amused itself like that. Selena turned from the woman. She had work to do, and 4 overseers had to pay a debt before she was done. She stalked from the mine shaft, pickaxe dangling from her hand. The 2 guards at the end of the tunnel were dead before they realized what was happening. Blood soaked her clothes and her bare arms, and Selena wiped it from her face as she stormed down to the chamber where she knew the 4 overseers worked. She had marked their faces the day they dragged that young Ilri woman behind the building, marked every detail about them as they used her, then slit her throat from ear to ear. Selena could have taken the swords from the fallen guards, but for these 4 men it had to be the axe. She wanted them to know what Endivere felt like. She reached the entrance to their section of the mines. The first 2 overseers died when she heaved the axe into their necks, slashing back and forth between them. Their slaves screamed, backing against the walls as she raged past them. When she reached the other 2 overseers, she'd let them see her, let them try to draw their blades. She knew it wasn't the weapon in their hands that made them stupid with panic, but rather her eyes. Eyes that told them they had been tricked these past few months, that cutting her hair and whipping her hadn't been enough, that she had been baiting them into forgetting that Ardalan's assassin was in their midst. But she had not forgotten a second of pain, nor what she had seen them do to the others, to that young woman from Ilwi, who had begged to the gods who did not save her. The men died too quickly, but Selena had one more task to complete before she would meet her end. She prowled back up the main tunnel that led out of the mines. Guards foolishly came rushing out of the tunnel mouths to meet her. She surged upward, hacking and swinging. 2 more guards went down, and she took up their swords, leaving the axe behind. The slaves didn't cheer as their oppressors fell. They just watched in silence, understanding. This was not a fight for the escape. A light of the surface made her blink, but she was ready. The light of the surface made her blink, but she was ready. Her eyes, having to adjust to the sun, would be her greatest weakness. That was why she had waited until the softer light of the afternoon. Twilight. Fuck, I lost my spot. Twilight would have been better, but that time of day was too heavily guarded, and there were too many slaves about them that could be caught in the crossfire. This last hour of full daylight, when the warm sun lulled many to sleep, was when the sentries went lax on the watch before the evening inspection. The 3 sentries at the entrance of the mines didn't know what was happening below. Everyone was always screaming in Endivere. Everyone sounded the same when they died. And the 3 sentries screamed just like the others. And then she was running, sprinting for the death that beckoned to her, making for the towering stone wall at the other end of the compound. Arrows whizzed past, and she zigzagged. They wouldn't kill her. By order of the king, an arrow through her shoulder or leg, maybe, but she'd make them reconsider their orders once the carnage was too massive to ignore. Other sentries came rushing from everywhere, and her blades were a song of steel fury as she cut through them. Silence settled over Endivere. She took a gash in her leg, deep, but not deep enough to cut the tendon. They still wanted her to be able to work, but she wouldn't work. Not again. Not for them. When the body count was high enough, they'd have no choice but to put that arrow through her throat. But then she neared the gate, and the arrow stopped. She started laughing when she found herself surrounded by 40 guards, and laughed even more when they called for irons. She was laughing when she lashed out one last time, one final attempt to touch the wall. 4 more went down in her wake. She was still laughing when the world went black and her fingers hit the rocky ground, barely an inch away from the wall. Cale stood from his seat at her foyer table as the door quietly opened. The outside hall was dark. The lights burned out. Most of the castle asleep and tucked into their beds. He'd heard the clock chime midnight some time ago, but he knew it wasn't exhaustion weighing down Selena's shoulders when she slipped into her rooms. Her eyes were purple beneath, her face wan, lips colorless. Fleetfoot rushed to him, tail wagging, and licked him a few times on the hand before she trotted into the bedroom, leaving them alone. Selena glanced once at him, her turquoise and gold eyes weary and haunted, and began unfastening her cloak as she walked past him into the bedroom. Wordlessly, he followed her, if only because she hadn't had a hint of warning or reproach in her expression, rather a bleakness that suggested she wouldn't have cared if she'd found the king of Ardalan and himself in her rooms. She removed her coat and then her boots, leaving them wherever she happened to discard them. He looked away as she unbuttoned her tunic and walked into the dressing room. A moment later, she walked back out, wearing a nightgown that was far more modest than her usual lacy attire. Fleetfoot had already hopped into bed, sprawling against the pillows. Cale swallowed hard. He should have given her privacy instead of waiting here. If she'd wanted him to be here, she would have written him a note. Selena stopped before the dim fireplace and used the poker to stir the coals before tossing another 2 logs on. She stared down at the flames. Her back was still to him when she spoke. If you're trying to figure out what to say to me, don't bother. There's nothing that can be said or done. Then let me keep you company. If she realized how much he knew, she didn't care to ask how. I don't want any company. Want and need are different things. Nehemiah probably should have been here, another child of a conquered kingdom, but he didn't want Nehemiah to be the one she turned to, and despite his loyalty to the king, he couldn't turn away from her. Not today. So you're just going to stay here all night? She flickered her eyes to the couch between them. I've slept in worse places. I think my experience with worse places is a lot more horrible than yours. Again, that twisting in his gut. But then she looked through the open bedroom door to the foyer table, and her brows rose. Is that chocolate cake? I thought you might need some. Need, not want. A ghost of a smile was on her lips, and he almost sagged in relief as he said, For you, I'd say that chocolate cake is most definitely a need. She crossed from the fireplace to where he stood, stopping a hand's breadth away and staring up at him. Some of the color had returned to her face. He should step back, put more distance between them, but instead he found himself reaching for her, a hand slipping around her waist and the other twining itself through her hair as he held her tightly to him. His heart thundered through him so hard he knew she could feel it. After a second, her arms came up around him, her fingers digging into his back in a way that made him realize how close they stood. He shoved that feeling down, even as the silken texture of her hair against his fingers made him want to bury his face in it, and the smell of her, laced with mist and night, had him grazing his nose against her neck. There were other kinds of comfort that he could give her than mere words, and if she needed that kind of distraction, he shoved down that thought too, swallowing it until he nearly choked on it. Her fingers were moving down his back, still digging into his muscles with a fierce kind of possession. If she kept touching him like that, his control was going to slip completely. And then she pulled back, just far enough to look up at him again, still so close that their breath mingled. He found himself gauging the distance between their lips, his eyes flicking between her mouth and her eyes. The hand he had entwined in her hair stilling. What is happening? Desire roared through him, burning down every defense he'd put up, erasing every line he'd convinced himself he had to maintain. And then she said, so quietly it was hardly more than a murmur, I can't tell if I should be ashamed of wanting to hold you on this day, or grateful that, despite what happened before now, it somehow brought me to you. He was so startled by the words that he let go and stepped back. Pussy! Pussy! He had his obstacles to overcome, but so did she. Perhaps more obstacles than he'd even realized. He had no response to what she'd said, but she didn't give him time to think of the right words before she walked to the chocolate cake in the foyer, plunked down in the chair, and dug in. What a wuss puss. What a fucking wuss puss. I think him and Dorian are so funny because they're literally the opposite of each other. Dorian had enough courage and I don't even know, he had the guts to pursue Selena even though he knew it was, not the smartest choice. But he didn't have the guts to stand up to his father when it really mattered for her. Kale, on the other hand, has the guts to stand up for her in front of others when he needs to, but he doesn't have the guts to say fuck it and go after her. It's funny. It's funny. It's funny to me. Ugh. That's ridiculous. I can't wait for chapters 28, 29, and 30. I'm guessing that's when Nehemiah dies. I don't want... And then there was Sam. Why would you do that to me? Why would you do that to me? Y'all. Sam had the guts to do it all. He had the guts to go for her. He had the guts to stick up for her when it mattered. Even though he really couldn't do anything. He was being held back while she was getting beat up. But that man would have done... That man did do everything in his power for her. And the world has not been the same since he left. I can't! Why would you do that to me? It's fine, it's fine, it's fine, it's fine. It's fine. What do you think about Kale? Originally, I was not a fan. I think I was only not a fan because of that one thing that he said. When he was like, what did you do to deserve getting whipped? It's payback for your TikTok. I literally cried making that. But when I saw that trend going around, I was like, there's no way I can make this about anyone but Sam. Anyway, but my feelings for Kale have definitely evolved because I was not a fan of him at first. I was very much Team Dorian. And then I lost my train of thought because I saw something on my car screen. Hold on. Oh, but then as him and Selena got to know each other better, I do like him now. I do. I can see the appeal on why people like him. I do. I like him. I like the whole forbidden romance trope also. I think that's also another element that's pulling me in, is that he's like, I can't, but I want to. And she's like, I want to, but we can't. And it's just, I love that. So yeah, I like him. It's okay. He's going to die anyway, right? I honestly, okay, so originally I did think he was gonna die. I still kind of do, if I'm being honest. I can see it. I can see the path that's being taken here. And I feel like I really see him dying. I really do. But right now, my thoughts on what's going to happen are that he's not going to tell anyone about the threat on Nehemiah's life, because he's too loyal to the people that he serves. And so in doing so is going to accidentally cause the death of Nehemiah. Selena's going to find out, or he's going to confess to her that it's, kind of his fault. She's going to hate him for it. And then in an attempt to regain his honor, or in an attempt to sort of make up for it, I guess, he's going to do something and he's going to end up dying. What if no one dies? If no one dies, then I will be, that's my fantasy. That's right there for me. Honestly, Sam's death was enough to carry me throughout the entire series. I don't need anyone else to die in this series, and I will be more than happy if no one else dies for the rest of this series, and I will gladly accept being wrong if it means that no one else will die. So I'm good with it. I'm happy if no one dies, honestly, truthfully. I don't think I can take another death. I can't. Y'all, I can't take another death. If someone dies in this book, I will lose my mind. I will. I'll lose my mind because I'm so emotionally attached to everyone, and also because Selena doesn't need another death. Why would you want to hurt Selena like that again with someone else dying that she loves? I really hope no one dies. Fave character so far. Roland. No, I'm just kidding. Could you imagine? No, I'm just kidding. Mort. I really like Mort. He's funny. But out of like her, Kale, and Dorian, I want to say Nehemiah. I really like Nehemiah. I really do. We need to pull funds for Bee's therapy. Oh God. Bessie's why? Does someone die in here? Maybe someone just gets like shipped off to Calicula, because that's also been a very big theme in this book. There's the word. Calicula has also been a very big, theme. So maybe someone gets shipped to Calicula, and they have to spend a year in a slave mine. So, who knows? No, it's okay if no one's screen recorded. I can download. The only reason I haven't been posting lives is because I really haven't had big reactions to many of the things that have been going on. It's mostly just a build up. So, that's why I haven't really been posting anything, because my reactions have been kind of just like a little small, because nothing too big has happened yet. But I have a feeling by the end of this book, I'm going to have to make another fucking video of another edited video of me crying like I did with the Assassin's Blade, because I just really don't want anyone to die. I don't want Nehemiah to die, and I don't want Kale to die, because I'm starting to like him. And I hate that SJM does that, because that's what she did with Sam. I didn't like Sam at first, because I thought he was a little bitch. And then she made me like him, because it turns out that he loved Selena, and then she took him away and she killed him. Will you post the live from last Monday of you finishing book 1? Yeah, I can, if you want. I'll post it on my Instagram. But I did remove all of my, like, lives from my photo grid. So you'll just have to go to, like, there's, like, sections on top of my photo grid on Instagram. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. And it, like, has IGTV on there. And that's where that's where it goes. That's where it'll be. So it won't be on my main profile. You'll just have to click the IGTV button. Crescent City is going to be fun. I've heard so many things about people saying that Crescent City literally made them, like, scream, cry, throw up. Like, that's why I haven't read it, because I would start it. It could be, like, the book, because you know that I read yeah, okay, sorry, I'm bouncing. I've seen so many, I don't know what the book is called, but I've seen the one about the dragon. It's a thick book. So first of all, it's like a thick book, right? She's thick. And it has, like, a dragon on it, and, like, the cover is, like, orange. I don't know if y'all know what I'm talking about, but that's like, it jumped to the top of my TBR. The orange tree one, maybe? It has a blue dragon on it. It has a blue dragon on it, and the cover is, like, orange or something. Yeah, something. It's a yeah, I think that's it. The orange tree one, yeah, I think so. It jumped up on the top of my TBR because I saw a review. Someone posted a review on TikTok about it, and the review was literally, like, so good, and it made me really want to read it. And it has dragons in it, and, like, I want dragons. So I will be reading that one on my own, though, not, like, live or anything. But you know what book I really need to read? Y'all don't be mad at me. Please don't be mad at me. I have not touched this book. I carry it in my tote bag because I hope that at some point I'll be doing nothing and I'll have the motivation to read it. I have not touched this book since that live that I did. I have not touched it. I have not thought about it. It's been in my tote bag ever since. Yeah, I haven't started it. I really need to read it, though. Like, I really do. I'll force myself. Because, like, look, I still have we were on chapter what? Like 5? 6. I'm on chapter 6. So, I know, I really need to read it. But then I got so caught up in Throne of Glass that I haven't even thought about this. I haven't even thought about it. It needs to be open and in your hands. Okay. I'll read it. I will. I'll read it. I'll try my best to read it. That's what I'll say. I'm reading Kingdom of the Wicked to get out of this void Throne of Glass has put me in. Listen, I had a dream. This is how much I think about Kingdom of the Wicked and how much I, like, think about the third book that's coming out. I had a dream that I got an email saying that I was selected to receive the third book's ARC. And that's it. That was a dream. And I was so excited, and I woke up and it wasn't real. Finish all of SJM's books and then jump back to From Blood and Ash. I'm refusing to read it. And you won't be able to stop reading Throne of Glass after you finish book 2. I would stop. No, literally. I was so excited, and I woke up and I went and I checked my email. Nothing. I was so sad. And I was like, maybe it's a sign. Maybe I will read it. Or maybe I will get the ARC for it, but no, I don't. I'm refusing to read it. What are you refusing to read it? What are you refusing to read? The War of Two Queens? Because it's not that I'm refusing to. I have no motivation to read it. Like, none. I honestly think I haven't read anything. Y'all, ever since I think the Assassin's Blade put me in a reading slump, because ever since I read it, I have not touched another book. I haven't. The only reason I'm even reading the rest of these is for y'all. Like, but, like, I get excited to read these books. Like, once I actually started Throne of Glass, because I didn't want to start Throne of Glass, once I actually started it and got into it, like, I'm excited now to read it. But like outside of these lives, I have not been reading anything. I can't. I tried to finish that ARC that I got of the mean CEO and the sweet teacher, and I couldn't. I couldn't. I think I'm in a reading slump. Oh. I finished CoM yesterday and already halfway through Air of Fire. Is Air of Fire the one that everyone says I'm gonna need help on? No, that's Kingdom of Ash, right? Kingdom of Ash. Everyone always says I'm gonna need like therapy for one of them, and I think it's Kingdom of Ash. Air of Fire is incredible and in a different league too. What is this one called? Crown of Midnight? Okay. Oh God. Queen of Shadows. Oh, Queen of Shadows is the one I'm gonna need therapy for. Great. All of them. You'll need therapy for all of them. Okay, well, you know what? This is what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go home. I'm gonna go on Amazon.com. And you know what? It's actually the perfect time to do this, because I got, one of my students gave me, I'm not gonna show her name, a $25 gift card to Amazon. So I'm gonna go on Amazon. I'm gonna order some standalones, maybe some short series, like a 3-book series or a 2-book series. And I'm going to order books, and I'm going to get myself out of this reading slump, because I didn't have any monthly reads for the month of May except for The Assassin's Blade. And I was not going to make a video talking about The Assassin's Blade, because I already made enough videos talking about The Assassin's Blade. And I said everything I need to say about that book, that it destroyed me. And which book is your favorite so far? The Assassin's Blade. So I'm fucking talking shit about it. The Assassin's Blade. The Assassin's Blade. I think it's always going to have this special place in my heart, and it's always just going to be one of the ones that I go back on and just like look back on, and I'm like, you were a really good book. Like, you really hurt me in a way that I will probably never recover from, but you were a really good book. It really was. I know, I'm really glad that I read it first, and I'm gonna text my friend that wants to start Throne of Glass as well and tell her, because she already read Throne of Glass, because I think a lot of people suggest that you read Throne of Glass first. Something is biting me. Ow! So she already read Throne of Glass, but I told her to read I told her to stop, go back, get The Assassin's Blade, and read that first, because for sure before you read the second book, I feel like you should have read The Assassin's Blade. Yeah, that's her writing matures, and she wrote The Assassin's Blade after CoM, so I feel like it's written better. I agree completely. Yeah, you can definitely tell the difference in her writing between like Throne of Glass and The Assassin's Blade, because The Assassin's Blade was so well written, and it was so like just so fun to see her through her journey, and the banter between her and Sam, and just the description of you know, her pain and stuff is just it was so good. So good. It hurts so good. Y'all, also, I made a whole TikTok about a boy that I was talking to, and he ghosted me. Now I'm all upset. That happened yesterday. He ghosted me. Men will be men at the end of the day. They are just men. I was so sad. I really thought he was gonna be better. But no, it's just a man. Just a man. The book boy. Yes, the book boy! Technically, it was no, it wasn't even my fault. Because I went a couple days without messaging him, and he like checked in on me, and he was like, oh, like, did you die? Like, are you well? And I was like, yeah, sorry. I like got logged out of my Hinge and I wasn't getting notifications, so I just thought you were busy. And then I was like, you know, so this doesn't happen again, here's my number. That was on Friday, and I haven't heard anything from him, so true. He was cute though. He was so cute. He was tall, cute. He was an English man. He, you know, read books and asked me the books that I read and then gave me recommendations based on the books that I read. And he gave me, you know, his favorite books that he's been reading as recommendations as well, and wanted to hear my thoughts about them, and was asking me, he was actively asking me about this series and like if he should start it. And like, it was just green flag after green flag after green flag. And then, yeah, he ghosted me. I'm really sad about it, actually. I really started to like him. And I haven't liked a boy in like so long. And this is why. And so I was just like, you know what? Fuck it. Whatever. I gotta go. Kingdom of Ashes making me cry. Good luck. I thought that TikTok was about Dorian. I know. Yes, I saw your comment. I think, were you the one that commented like when you're his, when he's the prince and you're his champion or something like that? I saw that and I was like, oh, I was talking about a real boy, but okay. It fits. Yeah. No, literally. I'm so upset. Whatever. Whatever. I'll be fine. I still have my fictional men, so it works. But anyway, okay. Today's Sunday. I was gonna say I'll see y'all tomorrow, but I won't. I will see y'all on Wednesday. I'm hoping he reaches out. I know, I'm hoping, because he was super busy with work, and it doesn't seem like he's the type of person to ghost. So I'm really hoping that he at least like tells me like, hey, either I'm not interested or like, sorry, I've been like super busy. I got bit by something and I have like welts on my leg now. I don't even know what is in my car. There's nothing flying around. Oh, it itches so bad. I'll keep y'all updated. I will. All right, well, I'm gonna go home and order some books to make myself feel better. I'm gonna try. Y'all, I'm not even gonna say I'm gonna read this. I will read it eventually, but for right now, all I can do is try. I will try, and then, you know, we'll see. What time Wednesday? I'm in UK, might miss it. Oh, have fun. Oh wait, no, I think you live there. Sorry, I thought you were on vacation, but I forget that people live in other countries. Wednesday will be later, like around 5 p.m. Central Time. Yeah, which is kind of late for you. So it's like 6 hours. So like, yeah, like 11. As long as you read it before the next aside, it's fine. Take your time with it. I cannot wait for another Niktos Sera book. I really can't. That's another thing that I think ruined the Queen of Shadows for me. Queen of Shadows. Oh my god. What is it called? The War of Two Queens. I'm mixing up books here. Was Niktos and Sera's book. I liked them so much more than Poppy and Castile that I'm like, I just want Niktos and Sera now. I don't even want Us Europeans Are Here For You, B. Oh, I love y'all. Love you, Bree. But yeah. Alright, well, I will see y'all on Wednesday. I'll see y'all on Wednesday. Same time, 5 p.m. I love y'all. Have a good rest of your Sunday. Is out by November 15th. That's 5 days before my birthday. Oh, I get I get to order it for my birthday. That means someone else will buy it for me. I can get my friend or like my mom to buy it for me for my birthday present. Aha. Anyway, love y'all. Bye.